All right, now things are about to get real spicy. It is the Big Ten Game of the Week. This is the game that I am most excited about. A battle, the only Big Ten battle, featuring a ranked opponent versus a ranked opponent. In Sin City, the number 13 LSU Tigers will battle the 23rd ranked USC Trojans. You know, the more I research this football game, the more I dive into this matchup and really break this one down and start to dissect it a little bit, the more interested I am in this one. And the more mysterious maybe this game really becomes between these two teams that are mirror images of each other. I've been calling it the Spider-Man meme of college football games. These are the two schools that have produced the last two Heisman Trophy winners. Both of these defenses were terrible last year. Both of these teams have completely retooled their defensive coaching staffs. Both teams have quarterbacks that have waited their turn in the era of the transfer portal, where they had transfers that jumped above them, and now they've waited their turn to become the starting quarterbacks for these respective great programs. I could go on and on and on about the similarities between Lincoln Riley's USC Trojans and Brian Kelly's LSU Tigers. And those similarities and what they've done to try to get ready for this game makes this game just so fun to break down. Now, there's one particular matchup that I have my eye on, and USC's got to find a way for LSU to not completely dominate in this particular matchup. I want to first start with the LSU offensive line. On 3, Power ranked the top 10 offensive lines in college football during the offseason. You know who's number 1? These LSU Tigers. A big reason why is they have 2 first-round draft picks at both tackles. Will Campbell on one side, Emory Jones on the other side. Not just that, they returned 4 of the 5 guys on this offensive line that protected and run blocked, right? Because Jaden Daniels rushed for over 1,100 yards last season. They did all of that for the Heisman Trophy winner last year. You look at the middle of this offensive line, guards Miles Frazier and Garrett Dellinger also return up front. It's only center where they have to replace somebody up front. Now, when you look at the USC defense, of course, this is a defense that's coming off a lot of problems from last year. But you start to look at this particular football team and what the weakness of this defense is, it's the defensive front. Outside of Bear Alexander, there's some questions about that starting line, and there's some certain bigger questions about the depth on the defensive line as well. Once you start to get outside of Bear Alexander, you know, you get Gavin Meyer, who transferred in. You get Nate Clifton, who's on this team and in the middle as well. Like, these are question marks, how they're going to be able to go head-to-head, toe-to-toe, face-to-face, nose-to-nose, mask-to-mask with an offensive line like the LSU Tigers. In the media availability this week, Will Campbell was talking about, he was not pulling any punches. He's saying, we're going to be physical. We're going to run the football. All right, so USC has to find a way to combat that. Look, you're not going to stop them from road grading and getting theirs on the ground. I look at this USC front. I look at this USC attack. Even though Danton Lynn did a great job last year putting pressure on the quarterback, he had the highest drafted player in this past year's NFL draft, Liatu Latu. He had really good talent rushing the passer over there at UCLA. In USC's very first game, I just don't see that front group putting a ton of pressure on Garrett Nussmeier, racking up something like 4, 5, or 6 sacks in this game. Not saying it can't happen. I just don't see it the way this matchup really breaks down right now. So what does Danton Lynn have to do? How can he combat that? Of course, you're not just going to surrender the line of scrimmage to the LSU Tigers. Well, I think you need to get creative in your front, right? You need to put 2 guys on the line of scrimmage, 3 guys on the line of scrimmage, 5 guys, right? And if you look back at Danton Lynn and what he was able to do at UCLA, there were multiple times where he put a different number of guys up there on the defensive line. So you've got to try to confuse LSU up front with different defensive fronts, different stunts, different packages up front, and who exactly is up there as well. So nothing is the same, because what they're seeing from USC, I think, is a little bit different. maybe something that they might not be the most ready for. You have to keep them on their toes throughout this game, at least to be able to get pressure on Garrett Nussmeier. Now, when you talk about defending the run, I think you got to bring bodies up to the line of scrimmage. Like, when you look at this linebacker group for USC, I think a guy like Easton Mascarenas-Arnold could be an all Big Ten linebacker this season. So, and then if you look at how that relates to the defensive line up front, there's a possibility that all this defensive line has to do is just eat up blocks, let the linebackers flow to the football in the run game, and let them make plays. Because you just can't have LSU dominate. You can't have LSU rush for 250 and 300 and just pound the rock and pound the rock and pound the rock. Look, you're not going to completely stifle them. Their offensive line is just too good. But you just need to be able to contain this LSU run game. When you look at LSU in the backfield, of course, last year they were led in rushing, 1,000-yard rusher, Jaden Daniels from the quarterback position. You look at this running back room, it looks like it's by committee right now. Caleb Jackson, Josh Williams, and John Emery are in that backfield right now. None of those guys really stuck out and really popped last year because of what they had from Jaden Daniels rushing the football from the quarterback position. So it's a relative unknown how good 1, 2, or 3 all of those guys are really going to be this season. So you got to hope that they don't break out too many big runs in the run game, because we know how this offense can do throwing the football. And if they can also balance that out with the run game, that could equal disaster possibly for this USC defense as well. Now let's talk about this LSU pass game a little bit. Of course, Garrett Nussmeier comes in at quarterback. This guy's got an NFL arm. All right. He was highly recruited for a reason. He stuck around for a reason to be able to be in Brian Kelly's system and have success in Brian Kelly's system as well. Okay, you lose Malik Neighbors, you lose Brian Thomas. Those are first-round NFL draft picks. Just about any year, you're going to take a step down at that position, in that room. So who replaces those guys for LSU? You're looking at Kyron Lacey, 558 yards, 7 touchdowns last season. You're looking at Chris Hilton, 225 yards and 2 touchdowns last year. And then they brought in a transfer from Liberty by the name of C.J. Daniels, just over 1,000 yards and 10 touchdowns last season in Conference USA. So if you can contain those guys in the throw game from being game breakers and hitting big plays down the field, or at least too many big plays down the field, because I think both defenses are going to allow their chunk plays. Okay, when you're installing 2 different defenses and they weren't great to begin with, and you're bringing in new personnel, it's going to be who can allow the least amount of big plays. Now, when I look at USC's defense, I think the strengths of the Trojans is in the back end of this defense. I think they've really upgraded with the new personnel that they've brought in at safeties and corners. You look at Kamari Ramsey coming over from UCLA. You look at John Humphrey coming over with Danton Lynn from UCLA, very familiar with this scheme as well. Achille Arnold coming over from Oregon State, also at safety. So they have upgraded that room to Carlos Nicholson coming over from Mississippi State, a long athletic type of body frame over there that can get in passing lanes and disrupt some passing lanes as well. So I've got confidence that this USC secondary can cover these LSU receivers. So it all depends on this pass rush, because if Garrett Nussmeier has all day to sit back there and throw the football, these guys are going to get open, right? When you're facing a team from the SEC, right? When you're facing a team from a Power 2 conference, it's tough to hold your coverage for 3 seconds, for 4 seconds, for that long. So there's got to be some sort of pass rush. That's what I was saying, is Danton Lynn has to scheme it up. Personnel-wise, hat on a hat, man on man, they certainly do not have the advantage up front. So Danton Lynn has to get very creative in what he can scheme up to try to get some pressure on Garrett Nussmeier in this throw game, because I think it's going to be imperative for the USC Trojans in this one to create some turnovers with their secondary on the defensive side of the football. If they can do that, give their offense short fields back the other way, specifically early in this football game, to create some momentum going forward, that could certainly help USC. Let's head over to the offensive side of the football. You see it on the graphic. You have to know where Harold Perkins is at all times. LSU's defense overall is going through a lot of changes. The new guys that they've brought into this defense are not overly impressive. Harold Perkins is a guy, though, that can get it done. Double digits, tackles for loss last season. He can get after the quarterback. He can wreak havoc in the backfield. With this offensive line, guys shifting places. Of course, you're moving Jonah Monheim to the middle of that offensive line. You have a young player in Elijah Page as well at tackle. So you got to find a way. Right away when these guys come out to the line of scrimmage, you have to identify where Harold Perkins is right away. Because if you don't know, they're going to find a way for Harold Perkins to wreak some havoc in the backfield. So you might have to shade your protection to one side. You might have to shift things up front on the offensive line. Now that could maybe free up some things on the other side for some other pass rushers, but you got to feel pretty good for USC. If you can keep Harold Perkins at bay, I think, and if Miller Moss has time to throw the football, this is a USC football team that I feel confident. If they can contain Harold Perkins, this is a USC team that can move up and down the field. Although the front seven looks pretty good and I think could be improved for the Tigers this season, boy, I think the advantage when you're talking about these matchups, wide receivers against defensive backs, I think advantage USC. I think if Miller Moss has time to throw the football, he's got weapons all over the field. You got a guy like Zachariah Branch, just get him the football in space, and he's going to pop off a big play. Makai Lemon, Jacoby Lane, you saw what he was able to do in the bowl game against Louisville, a big, tall target like Deuce Robinson, Kyron Hudson, a more veteran presence in this room as well. Kyle Ford, Jay Fair, there's so many guys that can get involved in this throw game. You line up four of them in the formation, and it's pick your poison for LSU. I just don't know if LSU can keep up with what USC has on the offensive side of the football. That has to be USC's MO in this football game. You need to be able to run the football a little bit so you're not completely one-dimensional. So that's going to be a key to kind of offset, maybe keep LSU on their heels at some points in time. But I have a lot of confidence that USC can move the football through the air. Lincoln Riley, especially with all of the changes, new scheme and all of that Lincoln Riley is going to be able to put together a game plan that he's been working on throughout this offseason. He's going to be able to put together a game plan that takes advantage of maybe the weakness of the LSU defense, which is on the back end here for the Tigers as well. So I think the Trojans can come into this game if they can contain what LSU does in the run game. And I want to go back to defense for just a little bit because this is a point that I want to make sure I get out there. This is a point that I want to make sure to make. You got to tackle. You got to tackle. You got to wrap up. If you get LSU into third downs, I've been making this comparison here for the last week. You get them into a 3rd and 7, they throw a short passing concept for 4 yards, and you get them in the open field, you got to find a way to tackle. You got to find a way to wrap up and bring them down. You got to find a way to get that LSU punt team on the field. Because so many times during an Alex Grinch defense, right, they were out of position one to begin with. And I think Danton Lynn will have these guys lined up correctly. I think we saw that with Tony White at Nebraska. Like the jump you can make when you're just lined up and in the proper spot when the ball is snapped. So you combine that with being in position and being better tackling. They were even tackling better in that bowl game against Louisville. They got better even before Danton Lynn got there when Alex Grinch was fired. So if they can be in the right spot and if they can tackle, get that punt team on the field, a bend but don't break mindset, those could be the little things that the USC Trojans need to be able to do to come out on top in this football game with a victory. I cannot wait for this matchup in Las Vegas between the USC Trojans and the LSU Tigers. So you've heard my stance on this football game, but we're going to go just a little bit deeper into this thing as well, which means we welcome in a guest. Ryan Abraham from USCFootball.com, the publisher over there, a part of the 24/7 Sports Network. So this is obviously a huge game to kind of kick things off, first year in the Big Ten, right? There's a lot of excitement here, Ryan, coming into the season for the USC Trojans. What would a win in game number one over a good top 15 LSU team, what would that tell you about where the direction USC football is going here in this season for Lincoln Riley?
I think it would be obviously really important. You want to get a win in that opener. LSU's had some problems playing some tough teams in their openers, losing their last four, and USC's played more of the tomato can kind of games and maybe not looked as good. Last year, struggled a little bit with San Jose State. But I think it's most important if you're looking for the long-term health of this team, you want to see some of the things like the offense not dropping off as much as you might expect from losing Caleb Williams. And the defense getting significantly better, bringing in a new defensive staff. And it's funny, LSU's kind of looking at the same thing. So I think the result's important, but in this new era of college football, expanded playoffs and all that, and USC's schedule is really tough, you could lose an early game and still really not be out of things, certainly in the Big Ten race because it's not a conference game. I think if USC loses like a close one, but they look good on defense, it looks like the offense is going to be pretty good, and maybe some bad special teams play or something cost them the game. I wouldn't be too crying over spilled milk or whatever with that one. I think it's really seeing all that work that they did in the offseason with the bigger bodies and the better defensive staff and scheme and all that pay off. And if that's the case, I think it sets them up pretty well for the rest of the season. So it's important, but a lot of people aren't expecting USC to get a win here. So it would be big, but the more important to me is just like having a good showing that this team has improved from last year.
Exactly. We don't want a repeat of that Alabama game nearly a decade ago, even though that USC team did finish pretty strong that year. So maybe they'll take the finish, but certainly not the start. Being competitive might be the key. You mentioned defense, and I want to talk about the defensive side of the football because we were just talking about what this team, they have to look good in this first game to really see those signs of progress. What do you need to see from this defense in this particular game, which should be a pretty good LSU offense? What do you need to see from this defense to show that, hey, they've made progress in D'Anton Lynn throughout fall camp?
I think it starts with the tackling. And even before D'Anton Lynn took over, we saw in the Holiday Bowl this team tackle a lot better with a lot of the same guys. And I think some of it had to do with Alex Grinch's scheme. It was one of those things where guys weren't just in the wrong position, but they didn't know what they were supposed to be doing. You would see them looking at a wristband as the ball's being snapped, trying to figure it out. And for whatever reason, that was happening early in the season, and it kept happening the entire way until Alex Grinch got fired. So some changes needed to be made. So even in the bowl game, without a new scheme, you saw better tackling. I think it starts with that, but if you listen to some of LSU's players this week, I mean, they've made no secret about their desire to run the football on USC. And I think it's going to start up front, but just, it's not just the defensive linemen coming in playing well, but the linebackers who haven't been productive over the last couple of years, filling the right gaps and, getting their fits right and being able to stop LSU from getting a lot of success on first down and making their offense and Garrett Nussmeiser work easier because it's 2nd and 2 instead of 2nd and 8. And I think that's going to be really the key. You got to tackle well, but I think stopping the run, which is an age-old football thing that you don't talk about as much now. But for USC, you can't get pushed around like that. And if you the Washington game last year, Michael Penix throws the ball over the field, right? Washington ran all over USC, and that wasn't their thing. They have to stop that, especially against an LSU team that's really going to try to run the ball.
Okay, so I want to focus on that for a minute since you brought it up. You mentioned that this LSU team, they've been talking about how physical that they want to be in their media availabilities this week. And, outside of Bear Alexander, this is a defensive line that they've got a lot of proving to do. Let's just put it that way. What can D'Anton Lynn, what can this defensive line do to at least try to contain what LSU wants to do in the run game and trying to be physical up front?
Yeah, and they got LSU, if there's a lot of similarities with these teams, but LSU's got experience at both tackle positions, and both are probably going to be high NFL draft picks. So that's going to put a lot of pressure on USC's defensive line. They needed to add some beef in the portal, and they just weren't able to. They bring in Gavin Meyer. That we're hearing a lot of good things out of Wyoming, but he was a rotational player there. Nate Clifton comes in from Vanderbilt and added like 25 pounds of muscle on there, and he's going to probably play inside too. So they've moved some guys around, trying to get some help around Bear Alexander, because you're going to have to go deep and you're going to have to rotate guys. But I think they're going to rely on some of the edge play. Jamil Muhammad, came in last year, and I think he was a really good piece for USC. But a young player like Braylon Shelby, they just felt really good things about him coming off the edge and what he's going to be able to do. So I think pieces-wise there's some unproven talent, and it's not going to be as deep as you would like. It's schematically, I think, what D'Anton Lynn brings. Now, he had some great defensive linemen last year at UCLA, but they were pretty bad with those same players the year prior to him getting there. And they were number 2 in the country at stopping the run. So I think some of his schemes seem to fit well in the college football world. And it's amazing because he comes in from the NFL, and sometimes there's a transition when you go from trying to coach grown men that are getting paid lots of money. I guess you're coaching younger grown men that are now getting paid lots of money. But I think he did a really good job of stopping the run. And I think USC's hoping that he can kind of repeat those results at the other city, and the other college in Los Angeles.
So you've got 2 quarterbacks that have waited their turn, Miller Moss and Garrett Nussmeier. These 2 programs have had the last 2 Heisman Trophy winners, right? When you look at LSU, when you look at USC, I think in the past couple of years, people knew what they were going to get. Now there's a lot of newness. Of course, we're talking about USC here and the Trojans. What's one guy on this team that maybe people don't know as much about? People have heard of Miller Moss in that bowl game. Zachariah Branch is certainly a high-profile recruit as well. But what's maybe one name that people don't know as much about that could be an X factor that could really break out here in Game 1?
Yeah, I think if you look at that bowl game, they didn't play well on the offensive line all last year, and it just didn't seem to gel. They bring in the true freshman Elijah Page, and he comes and plays left tackle and did really well, enough so that they moved Jonah Monheim, who could have went to the NFL, to the center spot, and he's going to be USC's left tackle. He's a redshirt freshman. He's a monster of a man. My colleague Chris Trevino tweeted out a picture of him, and it kind of went viral. Just guy walking out of the tunnel. I mean, he didn't look any bigger than we've normally seen him, but for whatever reason, maybe there's perspective, he looked great. I think he's going to be one of the most important players for USC, protecting Miller Moss's blind side and just being young and an important part. They're not very deep on that offensive line. They got some young players, guys that came in his class and the class before, that they might rely on, but they would really like guys like him to kind of step up and be a rock solid part of that offensive line. So I think he's one of them. There's a lot of guys on defense, but I think there's depth all over the place. And if one guy doesn't perform, another guy can come in. So I think but I don't know if there's any replacing Elijah Page. He's going to be really important for USC, holding down that left side of the offensive line.
Boy, I am very intrigued to see what this pass protection, this O-line can do with a guy like Harold Perkins, right? On one side, that could certainly bring pressure on the passer here in this football game. Okay, so we talked about it's important to look good. Yeah, can they take a loss, come back in the Big Ten? Yeah, absolutely, right? That can happen. But we're focusing on a victory, right? We want to see a Big Ten. We want to see a USC victory right out of the gate, of course. If USC has to do one thing, what's that one thing that they have to do against LSU to get out of a W in Las Vegas?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about stopping the run, but I think it's about what you do well and what you're going to excel at. I think if LSU does well, it's probably going to be them being able to run the football on USC, where USC can sort of take advantage of a mismatch. I think it's with USC's receiving core against LSU's secondary. Their LSU's defense was bad last year, just like USC's, but I think the front seven is actually going to be pretty good for the Tigers. I think the secondary is where there's a little bit more of a question mark. And USC's got 4 really talented sophomore wide receivers. You'd mentioned Zachariah Branch, and he's the guy ranked highly in the new college football game. But if you look at his classmates coming in there, Jacoby Lane wasn't really well thought of as he was a 4-star recruit, but just not someone that was like, oh man, this guy's gonna be crazy. I think Lane Kiffin, Lincoln Riley. I've been covering this team for a while. Lincoln Riley sort of wants to keep him under wraps. He's just this big body and loves to. He's a really fun personality and just can snag the ball out of the air and contested catches and all that. I think he's going to have a huge year for the Trojans. And Deuce Robinson is a little bit taller than him. He's like 6'6". really big body wide receiver. And then Mekhi Lemon, he came in as well and didn't have the fanfare either, but man, he could be, I think he's going to be one of the starters for USC. But they have some veteran guys at receiver, but I think that the core of those 4 sophomores, they all bring a little something different to the table. If USC goes out and wins, I think those guys are going to have a big game. There's going to be some big plays, big explosive plays, good catches, contested catches, things like that. Where Miller Moss's deal in, you saw him throw 6 touchdowns in the Holiday Bowl. It'll be something like that those guys have a big game for USC to win.
Boy, when Lincoln Riley was hired as the head coach, he went out and he said, I got to get some pass catchers. And it was that class a couple of years ago that is expected to really step up into the forefront. Man, this should be a great game. I'm so excited. This is my Big Ten game of the week. Number 13, LSU. Number 23, USC. Ryan Abraham from USCFootball.com at 24/7 Sports. Thanks for joining me, Ryan.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for watching Big Ten Ted, where it's all Big Ten all year long. Make sure to like the video to spread the word of Big Ten Ted to the masses, and subscribe to the channel for updates on Big Ten content that drops every day.